Perfect. Welcome to the Squared Circle Shenanigans. My name is Brother Paul. I am one of your co-hosts, of course. With me, of course, is my other co-host, Reese. How's it going?
Hey everyone, how you doing?
Good.
Doing great.
Fantastic. Excited for our host. With us, we have the one and only 20 plus year veteran of the wrestling world himself, Marek Brave, one half of the head trainers for Black and Brave Wrestling.
What's going on, guys? Thanks
Well-
for having me on the show tonight. Happy to be here. Happy to chat with you.
Absolutely, of course.
Thank you
We
for
are
coming on.
excited to have you as well. So before we get into too much, we want to thank our sponsors real quick for all the love and support each and every episode, which would be Mint Cannabis, Smokers Society, Insane Wrestling Revolution, 8 Mile Vodka, Amaya's Fresh Mexican Grill, Lane's Pizzeria, Little Brown Jug, Dudes Talking Wrestling, Pro Wrestling Edge, Craving Sports Cards and Collectibles, Just Drive with Jess and Nerdy Designs. Thank you all for your love and support
Thank you.
on each and every episode continuously. And with that, let's get started. And I want to start with just like what got you into wrestling originally.
Well, so I got into wrestling when I was about 5 years old. I had a neighbor, a friend who was my neighbor who liked wrestling, and I didn't know anything about wrestling, but I wanted to play with the neighbor kid. And he asked me, "Hey, let's go jump on the trampoline. Do you want to wrestle?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, we can wrestle." He's like, "All right, I'm gonna be the Undertaker, and you're gonna be Shawn Michaels." And I didn't know who any of those people were. And when I envisioned the Undertaker, I envisioned like a deep sea diver, like full on suit with the big glass dome helmet, like an old school diver. We wrestled around for a while, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this was kind of fun or whatever." And he's like, "Hey, come over to my house. I'll show you some VHS tapes of wrestling." And he had the old wrestling magazines back when they were still in black and white. And we spent the next few hours just watching wrestling and going through the magazines and then pretending to wrestle and all this stuff. And from that day forward, I was hooked. There was never a time in my life where my fandom waned. I've been a wrestling fan ever since. So this would have been 1991, I think, when I became a pro wrestling fan. And here we are many, many years later, and still a fan, and now lucky enough to make a living off of this wacky endeavor.
Awesome. Did you ever, was there a certain wrestler you looked up to?
My favorite wrestler from the moment I became a fan to today is Shawn Michaels. So it was apropos that I got to be Shawn Michaels on the trampoline wrestling with my buddy there, because I just always gravitated towards him, from his in-ring work and his style. I love the gear and the entrance gear and just even the entrances themselves. When you talk about the WrestleMania 12 entrance coming down on the zip line there. Just always a big fan of Shawn Michaels. And once I became a wrestler myself and realized just how great he was at this professional wrestling thing, I was validated in that selection, I feel.
Nice. Do you have a favorite match of Shawn Michaels?
I still go back to that WrestleMania 12 match against Bret Hart, Iron Man. First time he won the WWF World Heavyweight Championship, so that holds a nostalgic place in my heart. But I would say that's my favorite match of Shawn Michaels. But if you ask me what's the best Shawn Michaels match, I'd probably go WrestleMania 25 against The Undertaker. I think that match is phenomenal, and in my opinion, probably the greatest professional wrestling match of all time.
Nice.
Absolutely.
I agree with you 110%.
For sure. Sorry. So outside of the ring, or outside of wrestling, I should say, you've competed on outside of the ring or out of a night fight. Sorry. And you're also a writer for PH Insider. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how both of those came about?
Yeah. So the TV show you're referring to, it was called Night Fight. It was on the History Channel. It was hosted by Christian, actually, of wrestling fame, AEW performer now. And it was an unscripted, completely real, raw, armored combat fighting show. So we went to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They got us in this giant studio that they had transformed into kind of like almost like a bowl pit, right? Just like a bunch of dirt and gravel, and they put a group of 6 each episode into era specific armored gear, night gear.
Right.
And gave us weapons and told us to duke it out, fight each other for real with these weapons, which is absolutely absurd looking back on it. And there were different voting processes, and people got eliminated and whatnot. I was eliminated relatively early on. It was a great time. It was wild. It was crazy. It's one of the most physically taxing things I've ever done. But what people don't realize is that of the 6 competitors on each episode, 5 were actual professional armored combat fighters. Like, there's a league for this. And you can do it in America. You can do it all over the world. And so I was competing against people who had been doing it for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, all around the globe. And I always tell people, I equate it to, imagine you've never played football a day in your life, and the first game you ever play is the Super Bowl against actual NFL competition. So it was difficult. It was very hard, but very, very fun. It was very fun to step outside of my comfort zone and do something, competitive that wasn't pro wrestling. Pro wrestling's not a true competition. It's more of an art form than anything. But I played high school football and other sports and stuff like that. So it was my first time really competing for a number of years.
Gotcha.
That would have been I believe it was 2018, the summer of 2018. And then I was scheduled for spinal fusion surgery. I'm sure we'll get into all that later on, but I was scheduled for spinal fusion surgery just a couple months after that. So I said, what's the worst that could happen? You mess me up when I get surgery a couple months earlier, not a big deal. So, and then the other thing you're talking about, it's actually a website I write for called the Finsiders. So the PH in there makes an F sound. And it's about my favorite football team, the Miami Dolphins. So I was hired on to write for this website. They are under the SB Nation umbrella. Each NFL team has a website run by SB Nation, and the Miami Dolphins are my team. So the guy who hired me actually is a massive wrestling fan. So he knew who I was from the wrestling world. And when he found out that I was a big Dolphins fan, and I actually have a background in sports journalism. I wrote sports for a local newspaper here for a little while here in Iowa. He asked me, hey, you want to come and write about the Dolphins? And I was looking for just a new challenge in life, something fun to do. And I've been obsessed with the Miami Dolphins for as long as I've been obsessed with pro wrestling, since I was 5 years old. And I figured, why not get paid for my obsession, right? So I turned a hobby into a little side hustle. But it's been fun. I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and no plans on stopping anytime soon. It's been a really good time. So awesome. Long-suffering Dolphins fan, but now at least I get paid for it, right?
Absolutely.
It's really cool.
Heck yeah. Getting paid for 2 of your favorite things, wrestling and football.
That's a dream, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what would you say is one of the biggest things you took away from the night fight?
I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. Like I said, it's not hyperbole when I tell you it was the most physically taxing thing I've ever done in my life. And like I said, I played high school football, have been a pro wrestler for 20 years, obviously went through pro wrestling training, which is no joke.
Right.
And I, at a point in my life, I was very big into CrossFit and all those types of things. But the most physically taxing thing I've ever done was that night fight experience. You're putting on these helmets, right? These helmets are very heavy. The whole suit itself weighs about 80 pounds. So take your weight, add 80 pounds, and then imagine fighting with these weapons, and people are trying to hit you and you're trying to hit them. And you have the helmets on, and the helmets are like, they smash right up against your face. So like your nose is like all pressed in and everything like that. And you're engaging in just this incredibly physical task. And I'm not going to lie, immediately you feel like throwing up. But I just kept telling myself, I can't throw up in this helmet. If I throw up in this helmet, it's not going to go anywhere except all over me. So my number one goal wasn't to win the fight and wasn't to win the episode or the competition. And I think there was a $10,000 prize for the guy who won the episode. Spoiler, not me. But my main goal was do not throw up in this helmet because I don't want to be covered in my own vomit on cable television. So I actually succeeded in that goal. I did not vomit. And I lived to fight another day, pun intended.
That's awesome.
It's really cool.
Was there any specific type of like training or weightlifting, any type of thing that you had to do for that either?
I wish. There was so much secrecy involving the project that we were not even told the parameters of the show until the day before we started filming. So I went through a casting process. They reached out to me through Instagram DM asking me if I had ever heard of the Armored Combat Fighting League, and I hadn't. They sent me some videos. I watched it. I was like, wow, this looks really cool. And then the lady was like, do you want to do this? And I was like, hell yeah, I want to do this. And so she told me about the show and everything like that. And I got, I guess, cast for the role. And again, I say role, but it was 100% legitimate. It was authentic in every way. We had to sign contracts that said we would not fake any aspect of the show. Otherwise, we would be in violation of some sort of game show ordinance, and you could face up to like $100,000 fine and jail time and all this stuff if you rig a game show. I didn't know that was a thing. So I go, yeah,
sure, down on it.
Yeah, it was the real deal. So I went through the casting process. Had to do some Zoom interviews with like some LA agents and stuff like that, you know, real big time. And I would ask questions about what it was going to be like, and they were very vague with their responses. But I thought, you know, what's the worst that could happen? It sounds like a good time. You know, there's going to be a lot of us who've never done this before. And, you know, I'm a competitive guy and a physical person. So I figured I'd stand a shot. And then we get there. And again, the day before, I get led into the production meeting, and I'm one of the first people in there. And then other people start showing up, and all of these guys are like, oh, hey, dude, what's up? Good to see you again. What's going on, buddy? And I'm like, oh, wait, you guys all know each other? And they're like, oh, yeah, we fight together. And I'm like, fight in you know, what sport? Like, are you guys boxers or something like that? Because they wanted people from like an athletic background. They're like, no, we're all in the Armored Combat Fighting League. And I was like, oh my God, you guys are all pros? And they were yeah. And I was like, and they were like, how many times have you fought? I'm like, never.
This time.
And so, I mean, I've already flown out there. I've already, you know, gotten all of the arrangements taken care of. And so they basically let me in on the deal. And they asked me, you know, do you still want to compete? And for a moment I was like, man, I'm going to get my head taken off by these dudes. Like, I mean, they're swinging, I'm not joking. They're swinging real swords, real axes and battle axes and different things.
Wow.
And I thought about quitting the show because I didn't want to die. And then I thought, you know what? Screw it. Let's rock and roll. Let's see what happens. And I showed up the next day and did my best, which was not good enough, but it was good enough for me. And I was proud that I got to step outside of my comfort zone and try something new.
Yeah. So you checked it off your list.
I don't know if it was ever on my list, but I would do it again. I would do it again if I was ever asked.
That's awesome.
Awesome. I wanted to ask you about your team, the Black and Brave, with Seth Rollins. Did you ever think that your team would be as successful and popular as it was?
You know, I don't know if there was ever any time to think about that, really. You know, we met when we were 16 years old. We bonded over a love of pro wrestling. We started wrestling when we were 17 for a local organization here. By all accounts, it was essentially a backyard wrestling fed, but there was a real ring and real paying customers. We had, you know, a building and everything like that. And a couple of the guys that wrestled were trained pro wrestlers, and they came back to Davenport, Iowa, and showed us some things and showed us how to take bumps and run the ropes and do some moves and things like that. So we had a very minimal amount of training. And we wrestled all throughout our senior years of high school. And then after we graduated high school, we were like, oh, well, you know, if we want to continue doing this, we should probably go get real professional training from a reputable trainer And that's how we ended up in Chicago. There's a whole story about Seth going to CM Punk school when he was running the Ring of Honor school in Philadelphia, and that didn't pan out. He didn't have the money to stay out there, so he came back, and we ended up going to wrestling school together in Chicago. And then we did that only for a couple months because, like I said, we had been wrestling for about a year and maybe 3 or 4 months at that point, and we had done a number of day camps with very big name guys, Shane Douglas, Samoa Joe, guys like that. And so we kind of knew what we were doing. We just kind of needed the finishing touches. We needed the stamp of approval from a reputable trainer. So Danny Daniels, he runs AAW in Chicago, one of the biggest indies in the country right now. He trained us and said, all right, well, you're going to come wrestle on a few shows with me. And so Seth and myself, we went out. Most of the time we were booked against each other. We would wrestle each other in the opening match. We'd do 10 minutes. A lot of times it was a 10-minute draw. This was 2000, early 2005, late 2004 when this was going down. So these types of things still happened back then, 20 years ago. Man, that's crazy. And then one day we just showed up to a show 2-3 months after graduating from wrestling school. And they were like, all right, we want you guys to be a tag team. And for some reason, we never thought that would be a thing. Like we never put 2 and 2 together that, a couple of young kids trained together, the similar look, muscular builds, long black hair. We never thought that they would want us to team. So we get booked as a tag team that day. We didn't know in advance. We show up and they tell us we're tag teaming that night. And they go, what's your tag name? And we're like, we don't really have one. They're like, okay, well, think of something and let us know. And, we're throwing around ideas and nothing's really hitting the mark. And then about 5 minutes before the show starts, they're like, okay, you got to let us know what the tag team is. And I just blurted out the Black and the Brave, because he was Tyler Black at the time. Obviously, I'm Marek Brave. And I guess there's some sort of Batman comic with like a similar name. And I'll be entirely honest with you, I'm not a comic guy. I do like Batman films, but I don't read comic books. Gotcha. And so that is not what was in my mind. My mind went to the daytime soap opera, the Bold and the Beautiful. And so instead of the Bold and the Beautiful, we were the Black, Tyler Black, and the Brave, Marek Brave. And for some reason, Seth liked it. He said, oh, yeah, that's really cool. And the promoter liked it. And so we were introduced as the Black and the Brave. And that stuck while we remained a tag team over the next couple of years. And then when we decided to open the wrestling school and we were looking for a name, I just said, well, Black and the Brave Wrestling Academy, because that's who we were and who we still are, really. So it was pretty wild. But no, we did not expect to take off as quickly as we did. We knew we were good for our experience level, right? Like we knew we were pretty good for guys who were just starting out, but we didn't think we were as good as the people we were on shows with. At the time, we were on shows with CM Punk and Colt Cabana and Jimmy Jacobs and Alex Shelley and Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli and all of these guys. And we were like, oh man, these guys are fantastic. We were big fans of indie wrestling before we got into it. We would drive hours and hours and hours just to go to these shows as fans. And so we really looked up to these guys. And then when we first started wrestling on these shows, it was very early on. We graduated our wrestling school in December of 2004 and started wrestling on these big name shows in February of 2005. So just 2 months later. And for some reason, we were a hit with people. I think, good looking guys, athletic, could do some cool stuff. And we were willing to make the drives and make the towns and put in the work and do what young guys need to do to be successful, especially back then. So it all worked out. And I think we both feel fortunate that it did. But no, to answer your question, we weren't anticipating it being as popular of a tag team as it was, kind of right from the get-go.
Okay. Thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah, sorry, I get a little long-winded with these answers. I know.
That was great.
That was great. Do you have a favorite match from tag teaming with Seth Rollins?
Oh gosh, we have so many. There's probably like a million that that like other people would think of, but I always just think of like these real small ones that we did where we just had fun with them and we were goofing around and you know, trying to pop each other and make each other laugh. I know one time it was me and him versus our trainer Danny Daniels and Claudio Castagnoli at a promotion not terribly far from where we live. I think it was in Peoria, Illinois, and it had just popped up. I think it was called Fist, which was a unique name for an independent promotion. And they were doing like TV tapings or something. They had like a local access show. And so we wrestled like 3 or 4 times that day. And one of the matches was myself and Seth versus Claudio Castagnoli, who's a good friend of ours, and our trainer, Danny Daniels. And I just remember that match being like goofy and silly and us putting like a lot of comedy spots in it. And I'm a huge fan of comedy wrestling. So I look back on that one and remember it being a good time. But our more memorable matches honestly came when we were wrestling against each other.
And do you have a favorite match when you guys were facing off against each other?
Yeah, I always go back to our no roped barbed wire match for the AAW Heavyweight Championship in Chicago. It was the first time that company had sold out a venue anywhere ever. And like we talked about, AAW is one of the biggest indies in the country now, but at the time they weren't. And Seth and I feuded for a year just to get to this no roped barbed wire match, which is very difficult to do on the indies, to keep people interested in a feud for an entire year. And I think we took pride in the fact that we were willing to do a match of that kind of brutality level. And I don't think people expected us to do a barbed wire match just because, you know, like I said, we were young, good looking dudes. You know, people would call us pretty boys or whatever. We weren't deathmatch guys or anything like that, but we had a little wild streak in us and we wanted to get a little funky. So we said, yeah, let's do it. And I actually had food poisoning for a couple days leading up to that match, and then had food poisoning in that match as well. So I was like on my deathbed for that entire day leading up to that, and then had to go out and do this main event heavyweight championship, no rope barbed wire match against, you know, my best friend and somebody who's incredibly athletic. So I wanted to make sure that I lived up to, you know, his standard and the promoter's standard and my standards as well. And so we went balls to the wall, went crazy, did some wacky stuff. And it was voted the best match in all of Chicago wrestling, not just AAW, but every match, every promotion that ran Chicago, including WWE. It was voted the best match in Chicago for the year, I believe, 2006. That's how long ago it was. But we were definitely very proud of that accomplishment.
That's awesome. I actually got to see. So there was a video of that match, and I got to see it.
Oh, awesome!
Cool. Yeah.
Hope you liked it. I was 20 at the time, 20 years old.
Yeah, it was a great match. I loved it.
Oh, thank you.
I would definitely have ranked it on like a top 10 of my favorite matches.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Who is someone that you've been paired with that you feel has had the most potential?
Wow, that's a great question. That's the thing about wrestling, right? And when you're around for as long as I've been, you meet so many people who are just fantastic at this, who never get that break. You know, they never get the opportunity to show what they can do to a wider audience. And for whatever reason, maybe that's injury or you know, wrong place at the wrong time for certain opportunities. But a guy who I always loved wrestling with, who I thought was fantastic, was a guy named Josh Raymond. He's from Michigan. He used to make the rounds with Jimmy Jacobs and Alex Shelley and those Michigan guys. And he was so fun to work with and just a fantastic human being as well. And we had a lot of the same interests. We liked a lot of the same music and movies and things like that. So we became fast friends. And he never got a big break. You know, he wasn't a large individual. He's a little bit of a smaller guy, but extremely athletic. Even taught me a couple of the cooler moves that I would bust out later on in my career. But Josh Raymond was a great guy who never really got his due. And there's really just so many, you know, everybody, I don't say everybody, but a lot of people know Jimmy Jacobs, but I don't think they realize just how influential he was on so many people that are killing it nowadays in the indies, and just how incredibly intelligent of a human being he was and is still, and how much he taught so many of the other guys of that era. And so I'll always be indebted to Jimmy Jacobs for taking me under his wing, and Seth as well. Jimmy Jacobs was the reason that Seth was in Ring of Honor, and I was supposed to be in Ring of Honor as well when I suffered my neck injury, but that was all because of Jimmy Jacobs. So we love that guy, still love him to this day. But I think more people should know just how influential he has been to today's wrestling.
Absolutely.
It's great.
So we've all said names here. Me, well, you both. I'll name a few clearly. Joey Mercury, Christian, Ric Flair, Mick Foley, Ricochet, Matt Sydal, Eddie Kingston, the Briscoe brothers, Jerry Lynn, amongst others, Nigel McGuinness. You've been in the ring with a bunch of legends and current and past wrestlers. Give us a little detail on that. And one question, if I could ask about it, is other than Seth Rollins, out of a bunch of names that we've all listed off, who do you think you've had the best ring chemistry with?
That's a great question. Yeah, I've been around a long time, so I've had the opportunity to be on shows and in the ring with just absolute legends of this professional wrestling business. And you named a lot of them there. All of the guys that I was able to share rings with, that you learn something from them, good or bad, right? Even if you're in the ring with somebody who may not be at your level yet, they always have an opportunity to get there. You can learn something from anyone. So every match you have is an important life lesson and learning lesson. But outside of Seth, I think somebody who I had great chemistry with, and maybe he's not a household name, but a guy that, we grew up with here in Iowa, and he's made the rounds. Shane Hollister. Shane Hollister is a fantastic pro wrestler, former AAW heavyweight champion in his own right. We grew up together. He was part of the original core Iowa group that we had here with myself and Seth and Shane Hollister and a guy named Crotch who helps at the Black and Brave Wrestling Academy. He's our assistant trainer there, a good friend of ours. We kind of all came up together, and we learned from each other, and we pushed each other, and we competed against each other to see, who's the best from this area. And, at times, any one of us could have taken that crown. There were times where people said I was the best from Iowa. Obviously, Seth has taken that to another level at this point. But, I firmly believe Shane Hollister has been a staple of the Iowa scene for the last 20 years and quite possibly is the best performer to ever come out of this state. So a guy that maybe people don't know a ton about, but if you type his name into YouTube, Shane Hollister, you'll find some really high quality professional wrestling matches to watch.
Absolutely. Okay. Awesome.
I've seen some of his matches, and I agree with you. Yeah, he's great.
Moves so well. Just a natural performer.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely.
Now, moving on a little bit, we've got some title history. You've won a few different titles, a few different times, held titles here and there. A decent amount of tag team titles, clearly with Seth most of the time. But let's talk about some of your heavyweight championship reigns. Who would you say was your toughest opponent as a heavyweight champion, whether before you won it or after you won it? Like, was it the champion you faced or was it somebody else? And like, what was going through your mind, like trying to prepare for that?
So I think maybe my favorite opponent, outside of Seth, we've talked about him quite a bit. Jerry Lynn, you mentioned him a little bit earlier. I wrestled Jerry Lynn for the first time when I was 18 years old, and I was scared. I was nervous. He's he's a legend in this business, and he's really, really good at this. And I remember we locked up, and I must have been a little stiff in that lockup, and he whispered in my ear. He goes, "Hey, calm down, kid. We're going to be all right." And then immediately I relaxed and loosened up, and we went on to have a really great wrestling match. It was actually here in Iowa at my home promotion that I debuted in when I was 17 years old, and still wrestle for to this day. Actually wrestled there on Saturday.
Wow.
But yeah, Jerry Lynn I had great chemistry with him. But he was also a difficult opponent for me because he tested me. He made me take my game to the next level, which is
Absolutely.
exactly what you need
Right.
when you're a young guy in this business. So I was very thankful for that. And he was somebody who was attentive, and after the match would talk with you about what he liked and what he thought could be improved upon, and then he'd take you for dinner afterwards. So Jerry Lynn is the man.
It's super cool.
And he's so like he's just a genuinely great person. He'll still text me on my birthday, wish me a happy, like he's got it in his calendar on his phone. He'll still text me happy birthday and text me Merry Christmas and things like that. So
Awesome.
yeah, Jerry Lynn's a great dude. And we had an opportunity to wrestle a number of times after that first encounter when I was 18. And I ended up actually losing the AAW heavyweight championship that I had won from Seth in that no roped barbed wire match. I ended up losing it to Jerry Lynn, 8 or 9 months later. So always had great matches with him.
That's
Absolutely.
awesome.
So one more quick question from me, and then we'll let you take over for a minute. What's one big piece of advice that you got from someone in the past that you can remember, and what's one big piece of advice that you would give to a newcomer?
Honestly, I think I can answer your both questions with the exact same answer, and that is to keep your head down, right? To stay focused on what you're doing, not be influenced by the outside noise, but keep your ears open. All right, be paying attention to anyone, everywhere, at all times. Figure out, the new trends in wrestling, and figure out when it's beneficial to follow those trends and when it's beneficial to buck those trends and go the other way, so that you can stick out and stand out and be something different, right?
All right.
But to do all of that with some humility, to be humble along the way, because there are times when being confident and borderline cocky in this business can get you places where you want to go. But there's other times where you will act that way in front of the wrong person, and that'll be the end for you. That'll be it. They'll tell you to kick rocks, take a hike, and don't come back. So keep your head down, keep your ears open, keep working hard in every opportunity. Don't ever waste an opportunity, right? You may think to yourself, oh, I'm wrestling in some small town in front of a small crowd against a no-name opponent, but you never know who's there. You never know who's watching. You never know who is going to make it later on, right? I remember Seth before he was a pro wrestler, when he was just Colby. And I remember going to Hooters and watching WWE pay-per-views together, ordering grilled cheese sandwich platters because we couldn't afford anything else on the menu because we were poor. And those were like $4 back in the day. They're probably like $17 now, but 20, 21, 22 years ago, those were cheap. So we'd go there, we'd order the cheapest thing on the menu and watch the whole show together. And now he is a multimillionaire, one of the most famous wrestlers in the world. So you never know who you're going to encounter that will be able to help you later on. So always put your best foot forward and stay humble while you're doing it. That's my best piece of advice I ever got, and the best piece of advice I can give to any prospective professional wrestlers out there.
That's great advice.
That's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, do you have a dream opponent?
I mean, obviously, I'd love to wrestle, or would love to have wrestled Shawn Michaels when I was young and healthy and in my prime, and when he was the same. If we were forced to wrestle each other now, I think it'd be an okay match, but certainly not a 5-star mat classic. So Shawn Michaels in his prime, that would have been a great learning experience for me, and super big mark out moment. So I think that's one of my only answers. Eddie Guerrero would have been a fun one too. Big Eddie Guerrero fan.
Good.
Yes. In your experience as a professional wrestler, and as a trainer, would you say, have you experienced a lot of backstage politics?
Always. It's the pro wrestling business after all, right? Everybody's jockeying for a select few spots at the top of the card. So sometimes things can get a little testy between some people, and sometimes people can act out, and I've certainly been guilty of that myself in the past. again, being around for as long as I have. I'm not an angel. I'm not a perfect person. Nobody is. But yeah, there's a lot of politics in professional wrestling. But I tend to think there's a lot of politics in any field. You guys want to be the best podcasters out there. So there's going to be people, when the profile raises, there's going to be people who are jealous of you and who want to cut you down and talk crap about you and tell you, oh, your show sucks. But you got to power through that and tell those people to kick rocks. They don't know what they're talking about, and it's best to avoid wars of words and instead just show people why you can be considered the best at what you do.
Right.
That's great.
100%.
Just another question. I know you were saying about not only keep your eyes open, but ears open too. What else would you say is essential for someone wanting to be a professional wrestler?
I would say be prepared for it to not be as glamorous as you thought it was going to be for a long time after you've begun your journey. You gotta start at the very bottom. You're the lowest member of the totem pole. You come in and you have to learn how to do it, for one, which is probably a lot more difficult than you thought it was going to be. I think a lot of people think that wrestling's easy just because it's a scripted thing. And they're like, oh, well, I wasn't good at baseball or football or basketball, but I'll be good at wrestling because it's not real, quote unquote. But in reality, not only do you have to be athletic to be a wrestler, but you actually have to have some theater chops as well. You have to have some acting chops. So you're blending the best of both of those worlds, the sports, the athletics, and the theater. So you have to master two different, forms of entertainment there. So it's actually pretty difficult to do that. So prepare yourself for the idea that it's going to be a lot harder than you thought it was going to be. And then even when you get decent enough at it to get booked on shows, that's going to be a lot harder than you thought it was going to be too. You're not going to get booked on WrestleMania for your first booking. You're going to wrestle in front of 10 people, 15 people, 20 people. You're going to wrestle against somebody who might not have been trained properly. You're going to make $5 on the match or $10 on the match, but you're going to have to put $40 in your gas tank to get home. So you're going to lose money on the show, and you're not going to have enough money to grab a McDonald's combo on the way home. So you got to eat whatever protein bar you were able to scrounge from your home, and you're going to miss out on birthdays. You're going to miss out on anniversaries. You're going to miss out on so many important milestones for your loved ones around you. And that's going to get you, ostracized by some. And it's tough and it's difficult, but you got to be able to block out the noise and stay focused on the task at hand and decide if this is something that you should continue to pursue. And I think the tough part for some people is that the real answer, the true answer is no. It's probably not something that you should pursue. There are probably other things and better things that you could find in your life to make a goal of yours to go out there and make money doing. But the problem with that is those things probably aren't your dream, right? So sometimes before you can realize and actualize your dream, you have to trudge through the mud to get there. And you have to trudge through the mud for a very, very long time. And if you're not willing to do that, then unfortunately you got to abandon your dream and go do something else. And that could be all right. You could have a good time doing those things. But if your dream's to be a pro wrestler, be prepared for it to suck for a long time before it starts being something that becomes financially viable for you. You make a decent amount of money doing, and most people never will. Most people never will get to a point where pro wrestling pays their bills. So if you're doing it for the money, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. You should be doing it because you love it. And then if the money comes along after that, then hey, that was a bonus. So I don't know if I answered your question there.
Oh, that answers the question. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We also had a comment by Jimmy Rothman. He said, and he makes a very good point. He says, you might not even make it on the card sometimes, even after getting there.
Yep, absolutely. Sometimes you just got to show up with the hopes of getting booked. And then if you don't, you still got to do everything with a smile on your face, setting up chairs, setting up the ring. Maybe they want you to take tickets at the door. Maybe they want you to sell T-shirts at the merch stand. Those are all the things that you that you have to do so that eventually you get to do what you want to do, which is be the star of the show. And everybody, and I mean everybody, starts out paying their dues in that way. You know, everybody again looks at Seth Rollins, one of the most famous wrestlers in the entire world, multimillionaire, drives the Tesla, married to Becky Lynch. What a life. He started out setting up rings and setting up chairs and working security just like everybody else.
It's crazy to think about, actually.
It is.
Let me just
Seeing
sit here
young
and
Seth Rollins.
Yeah, it's
you know,
crazy.
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Who is your favorite person to work with, past, and if you could work with somebody in the present, who would it be? Like if you could come back and be perfectly fine, or if you could have like a one-off with anybody that presently, who would it be?
So, you know, probably a chalk answer, but Seth was always my favorite person to wrestle. We just had great chemistry, and we were we're similar people, and we had similar minds for the business. And so we didn't often argue about, you know, what we should be doing in the matches. And when we went out there, it was just magical. You know, no matter what promotion, no matter what style match, no matter if you gave us 5 minutes or a half hour, like we were always able to maximize our time and work really, really well together. So, very thankful for the opportunities that we had to do that. But if you could give me a nice run with somebody right now, it would be Rey Mysterio. A, he's a legend, and B, my youngest son, he's 7 years old. He loves pro wrestling so much. He's a huge fan of luchadors, and his favorite wrestler is Rey Mysterio. So if he could watch his dad, actually, if you ask him, he'll say his favorite wrestler is Dad, me, which melts my heart, but it's really Rey Mysterio. Awesome. So if Ray and I could have a little feud and we could wrestle each other a number of times, I think it would blow my 7-year-old's brains. So, but yeah, I think he'd like it a lot.
That's awesome.
That would be a great match.
If you could pick one thing from the industry to change, if you wanted to, what would it be and why?
Wow, that's a really great question. What would I change about the pro wrestling industry? You know, I would make the pro wrestling, and you know, it's already kind of getting there on its own, but I'd make the pro wrestling industry the most respected form of entertainment out there. And I would make sure that every pro wrestler, no matter how big or how small, could make a living off of pro wrestling, could focus on their craft, and wouldn't have to worry about, you know, working that 9 to 5 Monday through Friday so that they could pay for their wrestling hobby on the weekends. That would be the one thing I'd change.
Interesting.
That's
awesome. Yeah, it's fantastic. All right. Well, this one's usually a one-parter, but I'm curious now for a two-part. Who would be on your Mount Rushmore? We'll do a past one and a present one.
Interesting. Okay, so we talk about this from time to time. Past Mount Rushmore, usually you got to give me like a criteria. Are we talking about who I think like my favorites, or
5? So usually what I do when I do it is I do like a main superstar, your one mid card guy, like Intercontinental US champion, your one main tag team, and like possibly a woman if you would do a 5th.
Okay, all right, cool. So I'll stick with those parameters. So I'm gonna go with Shawn Michaels for my main card.
Okay.
And these are just my personal favorites. So I'm gonna go Shawn Michaels for my main event superstar.
All right.
I am going to go Mr. Perfect for my mid card guy. For my tag team, and we're going past, correct?
Yep.
I'm going to go the British Bulldogs. We're going to go Davey Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid for my tag team. And for my female superstar, we are going to go Luna Vachon, because Luna was a pioneer in many, many ways. And she never got an opportunity to really show what she could do as a worker. So, and then for my current, for my main event star, I am going to go, you know, I'll give you something less chalky, right? Because everyone expects me to say Seth.
Right.
But I'm going to go with Bryan Danielson, because he is a absolutely fantastic professional wrestler, a great dude. We used to talk about books a lot, and he loved the book, The Notebook. Not the movie. He'd never seen the movie, but he would talk about the book, The Notebook. So he's a great dude, and genuinely maybe the best professional wrestler in the world today. So I will go with Bryan for my main. For my mid card, that's that's a very interesting thing to talk about. You know, I don't want to be like disrespectful to anyone. So maybe some wouldn't consider this guy a mid card guy, but you know, if we got to put him somewhere, I'll put him here for right now. I'm gonna put the Miz on there because the Miz
He was
is
really good with mid card though too.
what was that?
He's really good with mid card too though. Like he had really good intercontinental title reigns and
Oh yeah, absolutely. The
Yeah.
Miz is a fantastic worker. I think there's still a segment of the wrestling population out there that thinks the Miz sucks or something like that, or he's not good. Or no,
Right.
the Miz is fantastic. The Miz does exactly what he's supposed to do every single time, right?
Absolutely.
And he doesn't try to quote unquote steal the show like everybody wants to steal the show. The show doesn't need to be stolen, people. Okay, the show is organized in the way that it's organized for a very specific reason. Don't piss off the booker. I'm a booker in my own home fed here. Don't piss off the booker by trying to steal the show when we didn't want you to steal the show. Okay, when the Miz is a babyface, he does fun stuff. When he's a heel, man, the Miz is punch, kick, choke, talk smack. And that's exactly what I want out of my heel. So the Miz is a fantastic mid card there for a tag team. And I know they're not currently a tag team right now, but they're both still on television. I got to go the Usos, who very well could be the greatest tag team of all time. They're just, you're witnessing greatness every single week. They're phenomenal performers. I love them. And then I will go chalk with my female. You got to go Becky Lynch because she's tremendous. And what a sweetheart. She's so cool. And the fact, and I can't wait to read it, but the fact that she wrote a book,
dude, I can't wait.
While being at the top of the roster, like she is right now, touring, traveling every day of the week, and raising a young daughter like she is. And she wrote that book. That's the, you know, people will say, oh, ghostwriter this. No, I watched her do it. She would come to the gym. She would sit down on the couch. She would have her laptop out. And she'd be typing away for hours on end. Awesome. And then she'd go to the coffee shop next door. She'd grab a coffee and she'd be typing away on and on and on and on and on. And she wrote that book. And she had, you know, editors and stuff. And she sends it away. And then they send it back with some revisions and things like that. But she wrote that book. Those are her words. And I can't wait to read it. It should be out here, you know, in the next month and a half or so. She's a sweetheart. She's a wonderful human being. So Becky Lynch gets on my Mount Rushmore for sure.
Absolutely awesome.
That's a great pick.
Awesome. All right. Well, speaking of the gym and hanging out, let's talk more about, you know, of course, the wrestling school. So tell us when you started the school, how it, you know, came about, as you said. And then tell us a little bit of like what you guys teach there and like how does the classes go? What do you learn? And then like how do the students do?
Well, so we started Black and Brave Wrestling Academy in 2014. So we'll be celebrating our 10-year anniversary late summer of this year, which is crazy to think about.
Congrats for that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. I guess I don't know if we ever thought it would be as big as it has been. At this point, we're booked up nearly 2 years in advance, solid, and we have been for the last number of years. There's a long waiting list to get in. We do 3 classes a year, 12 to 15 students per class. And I'm blessed to make a living off the pro wrestling business doing this. So I wouldn't need to do anything else for money besides this school. And I'm very thankful for that. I'm very thankful that we have students coming from all over the world because they want to learn from us. And that's an opportunity and really a privilege that I don't take lightly. So, but we start everybody out from day one, from the very basics, whether you have had 10 years of wrestling experience or it is your first time in a pro wrestling ring ever. We're going to start you out from the ground floor and then build you up from there. Everything that we teach is based on something that we've already taught. So on day 0, we call it, is a conditioning test. We want to see where you're at mentally and physically. And then day 1 is just rolls. It's really just forward rolls, backward rolls, 3/4 rolls, things like that. And then we get into bumping and running the ropes, and then we learn the moves. And then obviously we're talking about psychology and promos and gimmicks. And by the end of our 12-week program, you are having full-on professional wrestling matches that you have spotted out yourself or that you were calling in the ring yourself. And again, whether you have had experience or not, somebody who came to our gym for the first time, stepped in the ring for the first time ever, will be having wrestling matches by the end of our 12-week program. It's going to happen. If you stick around and you put in the work and you don't leave and you don't quit, you will have matches by the end of the 12 weeks. We're on our 29th class right now, and we've never had anyone make it to the end of the 12 weeks and not be able to have matches. Varying levels of success within those matches, but everybody is able to put those together. So we teach as many things as possible. We try to touch on etiquette and fitness and nutrition and all of that stuff. We think it's a very comprehensive program and genuinely think it's the best training program in the United States.
Gotcha.
That's great. We got a comment from Sharon. She said, what a great opportunity. What a great opportunity and get to learn the ropes, so to speak.
And we do. Actually, I was teaching rope running last week. We were on the second week of our newest class. So
awesome. So with this, how many days a week are you guys training and how many hours do you train?
We train 3 days a week for 3 hours at a time, but we have open ring hours 7 days a week. So we have our own building. The ring is up 24/7, and that's on one half of the gym, and on the other half of the gym is our fitness area. So squat racks and dumbbells and kettlebells and wall balls and jump ropes and different cardio machines, stationary bikes, things like that. So we're open 7 days a week, and our students are able to come in during those open ring hours and work on anything that we have taught you. So if in class you were struggling learning a body slam and you wanted to come in the following day and spend some one-on-one time with whichever coach is running the open ring that day and get some extra work on those body slams so that you could lock it in and be ready to move on the next time we're training, you have the opportunity to do so. If you just want to come in and get an extra lift in, we do require that every student participates in 3 fitness classes a week with our trained, certified fitness instructors. So I'm not a fitness instructor. I'm the head coach of the wrestling portion of the program. We pay 2 guys actually to run the fitness portion of the program. So they went out and they got certified and then came back and they can teach you fitness and nutrition outside of the wrestling aspect. So we've had guys who've come in a little heavier than they would like, and they've lost upwards of 80 pounds while training with us. So
that's awesome.
It's if you work hard, you'll see results with us. So, but 7 days a week you can come in and you can train in the gym. But our official in-ring training, 3 days a week, 3 hours at a time for 12 weeks straight.
It's pretty good.
I wanted to ask you about when you said about gimmicks and promos. Do you get a lot of students that come in with like a planned gimmick, or do you help them like develop a gimmick?
For the most part, everybody kind of has an idea of what they want to do, and we'll, give our 2 cents, right? But you never know if something's going to work until you see it out there in front of an audience. I'll use this guy as an example. We have a guy, his name's Kevin, but he wrestles under the name Corn Boy. And when he first came to us, he didn't have that gimmick. He was just Kevin, and he would wrestle. And to be frank, it wasn't great. It wasn't that entertaining. It was pretty stagnant and boring. And, I told him so. I said, hey, man, you got to figure something out because what you're doing right now isn't really working.
Right.
So one day he came and he said, I have an idea for a character. I'd like to do something called Corn Boy. Now he's a Hispanic young man. And I was like, well, what's Corn Boy? And he's like, well, when you're in Mexico, you see guys on the side of the road that are selling, different fruits and different vegetables and a lot of corn, elote, the corn with I think it's like mayonnaise and different seasonings and stuff on it. And he's like, so I want to be a wrestling version of that. And I said to him, I said, it sounds a little crazy. It sounds a little out there. I don't know if it's going to work, but you won't know until you try it. So fully expecting it to fail, I watched him go out there and give it a go. And I'll tell you what, those people in the audience immediately connected with this character, reacted to this character, loved this character, universally loved this character. And now he's been doing it for, I would say, 4 years, maybe even longer, maybe 5 or 6 years. And the audience still can't get enough of it. They still love him to death, and he's just wicked over in multiple promotions now, using this corn boy character that, again, if he would have explained it to anyone, everybody would have said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. And then he went out there and he did it, and he did it with such just commitment, such a high level of commitment that you couldn't do anything but get behind it and cheer for him. So he's a little crazy, a little out there, but it works for him, and it works for the people too. So you never know until you go out there and give it a shot.
Interesting.
That's really cool.
Corn boy out here popping.
Absolutely.
So with training and wrestling, a lot of there's a small phrase that I've heard a few different times, which is the teacher teaches and the teacher teaches, the students learn, they get taught. But has a student ever taught you something differently, or kind of pointed something out to you that you realized?
I mean, it happens all the time, right? I can't give you like specifics, and it's not like they're teaching me like, oh, here's a new way to do a wrist lock reversal, right? But every day as a coach, I'm paying attention and focusing on my class, and each class is different, and each class learns in different ways, and you have to be adaptable. That's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I got from Dutch Mantel, actually, Zeb Coulter. I had a conversation with him shortly after we opened the school, and he basically said that to me, that not every class is going to be the same, and you have to be able to be adaptable and switch up your training techniques to benefit that specific class. So every day I'm learning something new from these students, in ways of technique, in ways of teaching and coaching technique. And I've adapted my style throughout the years. Some of those earlier classes, they get a little upset because I'm not as vocal and loud and yelling and angry as I was with them, but A, I'm a little bit older now. B, I had a neck surgery, which sapped some energy from me. Right. And C, I adapted my technique throughout the years to where I realized that yelling wasn't always the most effective method of training. I'll still yell from time to time, but for the most part, I try to be a little bit more reserved and speak calmly, and especially with this newer generation of individual, these younger guys, 18, 19, 20 coming in, they don't want to be yelled at because they weren't yelled at growing up. When I was in school, my gym coach and my football coach, they screamed at me all day, every day. And it's just how I learned to learn, really. But it's different now for the younger generation. So if you're not adapting your style, then you're doing a disservice to your class. But another thing that I always really like to do is we get a lot of foreign students, international students.
All right.
And I like to learn about their cultures. I like to learn about where they come from and the language they speak and the food they eat and the lifestyle. Yeah. It's a way for me to travel without leaving the comfort of my own home. So we got a student from France right now, and every day we talk about what France is like. I've never been. Someday I'd like to go. So that's another thing they teach me about is their cultures and where they come from.
That's absolutely cool.
That sounds really cool.
Well, actually, since you're talking about that, and you added that on, this is a perfect time for this one last question for you for a moment. It's a would you rather type of question, basically. Would you rather continue to do what you do now, which is stay away from wrestling and just train and live your life, or like would you consider being a producer or a manager if somebody called you and on TV doing or behind the scenes doing that type of stuff?
Well, without going into too much detail, there have been offers and opportunities to not necessarily do producing, but other things within the wrestling business for larger companies.
Right.
And I've turned those opportunities down, A, because I really like what I'm doing now. I really enjoy my job and running this school. But B, because I have 2 children and they live here. And it's very important for me to be a good dad to those guys and to be able to be present in their day-to-day lives. I don't miss sports practices. I don't miss games. I'm there to pick them up from school and make them dinner. And that's very important to me. So I want to be able to continue to do that until they're, out of the house. And then we'll see I feel old because I've been in the business for 20 plus years, but I'm 37. I still have a lot of life in front of me. Hopefully,
Right.
fingers crossed, knock on wood.
Absolutely.
And who knows what opportunities will arise. And if something, in the next 15 to 20 years, something like that comes up again, who knows? Maybe this time I'll say, yeah.
Interesting.
That's great.
Go ahead.
I'm going back, but I wanted to ask you a question about when you fought Mark and Jay Briscoe.
Yeah.
What was the in-ring chemistry like with you and the Briscoes?
So I was young and very nervous. That was our Ring of Honor tryout. So myself and Seth, we were wrestling against those guys as a tryout to get jobs with Ring of Honor. Unfortunately, in the tag team match, that is when I suffered my major neck injury, and I was forced to get spinal fusion surgery a number of years later because of that. But before that happened, the chemistry was those guys wrestling circles around me. I'll be completely honest. They moved so fast and did so much that my head was spinning, and I was like, oh my God. And I'm constantly asking, all right, what's next? What are we doing? I think if I would have had another opportunity to work with them, or multiple opportunities to work with them, I could have learned more and been able to hold my own. And not to say that I didn't. I think if you go back and watch the match, it's still a good match. Especially for the time period it took place in. But unfortunately, at the end of the match is when I suffered the real serious neck injury, and I had to be stretchered out of the ring and taken to the hospital and flown home and wheelchaired through the airports because I couldn't walk. And it was a pretty scary time, in all honesty. But if that wouldn't have happened, I'm sure Seth and I would have been able to wrestle the Briscoes a number of times. After that, considering we both would have signed Ring of Honor contracts, and I'm sure that would have been a major feud there.
Absolutely.
That's great. I wanted to ask you, let me see here. With the Black and the Brave, when competing, how was some of the you NWA Midwest Tag Team Champion with Tyler Black at the time.
Yep.
So when you guys won, may I ask what was going through your head when the bell rang and you got the belts?
I think it was just a little bit of validation of, okay, so we've put in a lot of hard work into this, and by no means does winning the NWA Midwest Tag Team belts mean much more than hey, we're the hot thing right now. I thought it was cool to win an NWA title just because of the history behind that company and all of the great champions that have gone through the NWA. And the NWA Midwest tag belts were so sweet. They were super cool, real leather, the red leather with these wings, pointy wings coming off that if you weren't careful, they would stab you in the midsection if you were wearing it around your waist. They were really cool titles. But I think, yeah, like I said, more just a validation of, okay, we're on the right track. We're doing things the right way. Our hard work is being recognized by promoters and other performers, really. And this gives us an opportunity to be able to wrestle the best tag teams in the area. And even with outside of the area, people were getting flown in and whatnot. So it was a really high point for our careers at that time. We were still fresh, a year and a half into the business. So we were both pretty stoked about it.
That's great. Yeah, I remember seeing that match.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a few of them different times in the beginning and just a few minutes ago. Injuries. Everybody gets them most of the time.
Yeah.
They're bad. They're good. They're bad, or they're not too good. Not too bad, I should say. Not good. Sorry.
Never good.
What would you say? What injury took you out the longest, and when it happened, what was the first thing that went through your mind? Because I'm assuming it was probably once you guys got up there and you guys were champions and you guys were bigger and you guys were bigger coming up stars. What goes through your mind as you get injured as a star?
Injuries are never fun. When I was young, I went a good solid 2 years starting out my career with no injuries whatsoever. And I felt invincible. I really did. I was taking all the risks, and I was a high flyer and doing all the crazy flips and twists and dives and all that. And then I started to suffer some injuries, and once you get one, you tend to get a string of them because you're overcompensating in other areas. which weakens those areas. And you start to, like I said, the injuries start to pile up. At one point, I tore my left bicep. It was a little bit different back in the day. You didn't really take a lot of time off when you got hurt because you didn't want to get passed up.
Right.
So I wrestled through that. I ended up taping my wrist through almost up to my shoulder. So it was like my whole arm was taped every single match. And eventually I didn't get surgery on this torn bicep because I didn't have insurance and I didn't have any money. So my arm ended up locking in like an L position, like kind of like this, right? It just locked in this position. And every night before I went to bed, I would just grab my wrists and I would pull and try and straighten it out, essentially giving myself my own physical therapy. And after about 6 months, I was finally able to straighten my arm again and essentially healed this torn bicep on its own. You know, it healed on its own in a weird position. And then I gave myself PT to get it back. So I didn't actually miss any time from that.
Okay.
Obviously the neck injury was the major injury. That's the worst injury I suffered. Ended up herniating 2 discs very nearly into my spinal column, which would have been a very negative result for me. So thankfully that didn't happen, but it forced me to get a double level fusion in my spine, essentially the same surgery that Edge got on his neck.
Right.
And it took me a long time to recover from that, about 2 years of physical therapy and rehab, trying to get back to where I was. I'll never be where I was physically prior to the injury, but I have been able to come back to the ring and wrestle sparingly, a handful of matches every year. I'm not out there every weekend doing this anymore, not at this age and not with the injuries I've suffered. But yeah, the neck injury was probably the real big injury. And it just sucks because you're trying to make your way to the top. And then when you get there, you're trying to stay on top. And when you get injured and you're forced to miss time, the world doesn't stop spinning just for you, right? It keeps turning every single day. So there's more people that join the business and climb the ranks and take your spot. And then when you're finally able to come back, your brain starts to question, you know, can I still do this? Can I still fight my way back to the top of the ranks? And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. And that's the hurtful truth to injuries in this business. But I always tell people, if you want to be a pro wrestler and you're committed to doing this for a long period of time, you will be injured at some point, and likely you will, you know, power through nagging injuries for the rest of your career. There'll never be a time when you're not hurt, so to speak.
All right.
Wow.
We'll get a few more questions and we'll get
Sure.
go. Has there been a match or an injury that has made you think, like, why'd I get into this, or I should stop?
The longer you do it, the more prevalent that thought is, right? Oh, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I in pain 24/7? Why am I throwing myself onto the mat and hurting my neck and my back and all this? I wrestled on Saturday. I hyperextended my right knee in a rumble, of all things, in a rumble match. I hyperextended my knee. Those are supposed to be easier matches, right? But now I'm walking around with a little like mini brace and sleeve on my right knee, and who knows how long I'll be feeling the effects of that. So like every day of your life, there's a moment you get out of bed and it takes you a good 10-15 minutes just to like feel like you can move and walk. I feel like, oh, I gotta, you know, get the spine working again. And every day you're like, man, why did I do this to myself? But there's just nothing that can replicate or replace the rush that you get from performing in front of a screaming audience and being able to make them feel how you want them to feel, getting them in the palm of your hand and providing them with just a night of emotion and entertainment. So that's why the big joke in pro wrestling is that nobody's ever really retired, because eventually you're going to miss the feeling, right? So the only people who retire are the ones who are forced to retire from injury, or the ones who just eventually get too old to be able to do it.
Right.
And I mean, we've seen, you could be in your 70s and still doing this stuff. So
Ric Flair.
Flair.
Points left and right.
Ric Flair, baby. Woo.
I know I've asked this question a couple of times to a couple different wrestlers. I just like hearing everyone's different perspective. If you could go back and talk to a young Marek Brave when Marek Brave just getting into the business, what would you say to him?
I would tell him that the reverse Rana on Jay Briscoe is not worth it, because that's what's going to end up messing your neck up for the rest of your life, and cause you to have to change everything about your day-to-day life. But no, I would just tell him, like, hey, listen, don't put so much pressure on yourself, right? Remember why you got into it in the first place. It's supposed to be fun.
Right.
You didn't start watching pro wrestling when you were 5 because you thought that you would make a career out of it someday. You started watching it because it was awesome and it was fun. And don't lose sight of the fact that every time you get an opportunity to be in the ring in front of an audience, it's a privilege, right? It's not a right. Nobody's guaranteed those opportunities, right? So make the most of it and remember to have a good time, and be nice to the people around you as you're doing it too, because everybody's out there just trying to do their best.
Absolutely. All right. I believe last question for the episode. It's been a fantastic episode. Great time.
Yes. Great.
Thanks, guys.
Loved all the stories. Loved all the conversation. You've had a successful career throughout your career, clearly, and still, like you said, you're at a young age. You could possibly come back. You could do what you do. But my question is, do you ever see yourself, clearly Marek Brave, in any type of Hall of Fame? And is that one of your biggest achievements that you haven't technically received yet that you want to receive?
Well, so I am in one Hall of Fame. I'm in the local company that I wrestle for, and started out with when I was 17. There's a Hall of Fame there, and Seth and I were the inaugural members of that Hall of Fame. So that is that was fun for us. And then in AAW, there's not like a true Hall of Fame. But they have large banners of all of the influential wrestlers that have come through and spent time in AAW throughout the years, and those get put up on the wall for every show. And I was able to get my banner for AAW a couple years ago, so that felt really good too. But I don't know if I'll ever make any sort of indie wrestling Hall of Fame or anything like that. Maybe for my career as a trainer, depending on how that progresses over the next, however many decades that I continue doing this. Hopefully, again, fingers crossed, hopefully I'll be able to do it for a long while. But at the end of the day, as long as there's people out there who took joy in what I did and were appreciative of what I did, and as long as I was able to make those people forget about the day-to-day, forget about all the troubles in their life, even just for 10 to 12 minutes when I was out there doing my thing, and they remember some of my most famous moments that I've forgotten throughout the years,
Right.
and they pass those stories down to their kids, and I think I've done all right, and that's enough for me.
Absolutely.
That's great.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you having me on, guys.
Of course.
Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for being willing to take time out of your day to visit us.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very much.
But before we end the stream, I wanted to just send out a huge thank you once again to our sponsors, which is the Mint Cannabis, Smokers Society, Insane Wrestling Revolution, 8 Mile Vodka, Amaya's Fresh Mexican Grill, Lane's Pizzeria, The Little Brown Jug, Dudes Talking Wrestling, Pro Wrestling Edge, Just Drive with Jess, Nerdy Designs, and Craving Sports Cards and Collectible. Thank you all for your love and support for each and every episode continuously. And join us next week where we will be joined by Carnage Perez via video as well. And we'll have more great conversations for you guys next week. Thank you all for coming out. It's been a great show.
Have a great
good
night,
night.
everyone.